In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Amen. Please be seated. Well, I can't resist going with James again this morning. Such an eloquent sort of denunciation of the tongue deserves more talk from another tongue. It just calls it forth. Actually, what it makes me think is I ought to just say, let's have 5 minutes of silence and then go on with the liturgy. Lest my member be full of deadly poison. I just think that this particular verse, and for those who might see this at home, it's James 3, 1-12. And this particular translation, I think, highlights and even emphasizes in a greater way than earlier ones, this whole thing about the tongue is placed among our members as a world of iniquity. It stains the whole body, sets on fire the cycle of nature, and is itself set on fire by hell. Lord have mercy. I don't remember reading that in my Bible ever before. Somehow I've skipped over this verse because it makes you think maybe you just should not have one. Which is, of course, the wrong point. It's like saying you're going to poke your eye out every time you look upon somebody and have a lustful thought. We'd all be blind by this point in life. So the sense of what's being said here is no, not cut out your tongue, but it is such a huge emphasis upon the importance of words. How words matter. And how it matters how the words are said. That's why I really don't like texting and Facebook and all this way. It's perfectly fine if you want to tell somebody pick up a cup of sugar at the store before you come home. But to communicate deep and profound ideas, to give subtleties or nuance to whether something, and often in the New Testament, I think Jesus was laughing when he said this. If he said it serious, it's really not, I don't like it if he meant it serious. You know, I think he was poking fun. He was a Jewish man. I was listening to a Jewish comic. Jewish comics are the best. He started going through, he'd made some silly mistake in life and felt like a real dummy. But he started going through and he says, I'm this and that. I mean, it was a list of Yiddish words about this long. And he says the Eskimos have 100 words for snow. Jews have 100 words for shame. And so the sense here is that this very Jewish understanding of the fact that evil does not come from the ether. Doesn't come from out there somewhere where you're afflicted and all of a sudden you come out bad. You know, it came over me and I went berserk. I mean, that stuff is already in there before something out there provokes us. You see, my tongue, let's just talk about mine, in the most mundane of situations, having been raised by Lance Turner on a farm with lots of contrary equipment and animals, I have a rich vocabulary for frustration and anger. And I try to restrain myself from sharing that rich vocabulary with anybody else, although every now and then something slips out. You see, I come to understand, and this is how I understood it. Once I was in line at a McDonald's over in Arvada, I think, or Wendy's, one of them. Anyway, I was in the line and it was a busy one that had some back and forth in it. And I was doing my back and forth, and right in front of me was a woman with 2 kids about like that, you know, heading for junior burgers. And behind came in 2 or 3, 4 teenage boys. who were using a rich vocabulary that they must have learned from their father on the farm at some point. But it was so out of place that I just turned around and I said, "Stop it. Do you see those children there? This is a family place. Don't talk that way." You would have thought I had shot him with a gun. But it was, it was that sense of the tongue is full of poison. And at least if you're going to let the poison spill, go do it outside in the barn where it belongs. That'd be how my daddy would talk. Don't you ever do it in front of your mama or I'll get in trouble. That was generally what happened when Dad came to me. It was because he was in trouble over my behavior. So, but what I want to say is that from an early age, I mean, how many parents have been embarrassed by a 2 or 3 year old that comes out with a nice curse word in an inappropriate setting? Well, and you have to say, where did that child learn that word? Well, of course we know. But and so that's curse words, and they're sort of what they are. But there are hurtful words, much more hurtful words. And I think if we were to really, do a kind of a spiritual exercise where each of us thought in our own life, what are the words that if somebody says this to me, it just is a punch in the gut. And it doesn't matter how ready I am or how much I think. If somebody calls me this or says this about me or somebody, it's like getting hit in the gut. And not a blow was thrown, right? No one was touched. And yet it's almost like you can't breathe. You've been hit so hard. So words have impact, for good or for ill. Now I think the emphasis on the ill is to make us truly aware that when we use hurtful language, it's hurtful because it really hurts. Not because it's, "Oh, I'm sorry I said this in public," or, "Oh, I'm sorry this bothered you." That's the apologies this day. Usually, nobody apologizes for actually doing something wrong. They usually apologize for somebody else being bothered about it. That's not what's called for in James. James is about our interior life. You remember what Jesus, was it last week? That it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles the human, but what comes out of the human heart. This faith and this growth in the Spirit, this coming to a place where what comes out of our mouth is fresh water, is a word that is a capital W word, saying something that is efficacious. That's a big word for it helps somebody. It does some good. It builds somebody up. Now, this isn't done by giving false flattery, by the way, which is the first thing teenage boys learn to do to try to get in the good graces of girls, is say all kinds of flatterous things that may or may not be true. And we can usually tell when somebody's buttering us up. The parent who says, son, you never say that to me unless you want something. It's a giveaway. It's a tell. You're being nice to me. How do we get to that place where our words are words that build up and not tear down? Words that give hope, not despair. Words that help people let go and be forgiven. If there's anything that'll destroy a relationship or a marriage, it's when one or the other will not ever let the other one forget about something they did wrong 20 years ago. And every time they're losing an argument, all of a sudden that becomes relevant again. Because I know it will hurt you if I say it. There's a lot of smiling going on. I think maybe some of y'all recognize what I'm saying. And so this is part of human nature. See, the comfort that I get from reading James is that it must be human nature, because they were talking about it 2,000 years ago. It was a problem. Since human beings developed speech, it's been a problem. Probably. So how do we tame those things? If the tongue just really stands for all my worst instincts and my worst impulses, my reactivities, my weak spots, my tender spots that I don't want to heal up, are they really being attended to in my prayer, in my faith? And I think this is the hardest thing, is when there's something really amiss inside of us. Something that just can't seem to get resolved. How do we get it tamed? I'm never not going to think this. I've tried. As a matter of fact, as someone who was deeply opposed to the Vietnam War at the time and registered as a conscientious objector, willing to serve in the military but in non-combat, I had to say, how can I bless the Lord and shoot somebody made in his image? Now I was 17 and I was being taught by mostly literalists in the Bible. Unfortunately, they forgot that I could read, and I read Matthew, where it says, don't curse your enemies. Pray for them. Paul says, be so nice to them that it really makes them mad. Paul's more like me. How do we tame ourselves? I think it's a lifetime project. But it starts with honesty. And sometimes people say, oh, you're so honest. Well, no, I don't never tell you any of the details, do I? But I certainly experienced the experiences. And it's the common thing that we struggle with, which is, how do I be a kind person in the face of provocation? How do I stay calm in the face of someone else's anger? How do I stay present when somebody's criticizing? Those are hard tasks to learn, but they're spiritual tasks. Because to the degree that we can, then we don't do, now I'm tying this together, this may be a really loose tie, so it may come undone on the way home, but that this idea that Peter was Satan is connected to what I just said. Now, Peter's not the devil, right? He's not the fallen angel that Jesus saw coming down out of the sky. He doesn't have super evil powers. He's just Peter. So what is he in that moment? Well, he's Satan in the true ancient idea of Satan, as Satan was in Job. He's the adversary. He's the prosecutor in Job. He's the one who's saying, he's not innocent. I'll prove it. You see, this isn't the Satan of Dante's hell. This is when we become an adversary to God's movement, to God's will. And that's what Peter was doing in that moment. Jesus is trying to screw up his courage. He said, this is what's going to happen. This is what's going to happen. He's trying to buoy himself up, and I'll rise again after 3 days. And Peter says, no, that's not the plan for the Messiah. Now, he didn't do something evil. He didn't tear anybody up. He didn't cuss or curse or any of those things. But with his tongue, he became an adversary to the movement of God's Spirit. And that happens inside us over and over and over again until we identify what the adversarial part of ourselves is. And why is it afraid? Why does it object to clean water and in fact wants to put out a little brackish? And when I discover those things, then I can start to tame them. Doesn't say eliminate, tame. Bring under control. Make obedient. That's what tame means. So James calls us not only to look good, but to say good. Not only to do good, but to speak well, and not just proper grammar. I've always wondered, some of the worst gossips I've ever heard will say, you know, my mom was a saint. She never said a bad thing about anybody. And I'm making up for it. No, that's the part they don't say. You see, we all admire somebody like that. Let's all become somebody